Good evening, this is Viewpoint. I'm Zaka Jacob. A significant story that News18.com broke this morning. A few days ago, Chinese PLA team encroached into Tawang in the eastern sector and tried to destroy some defenses. The Indian Army gave a befitting response. There was an on-ground meeting which finally resolved the situation. Now, in addition to whatever's been happening in Ladakh over the last year or so, that's in the western sector, we've also had the incursion in Barahoti in the middle sector and now in Tawang in the eastern sector. What exactly is going on? Is there at some level a certain amount of desperation evident amongst the Chinese and particularly the PLA? But first, let's get to the story. All right, joining us on the talking point this evening, Charu Pragya is National Spokesperson of the BJP, Praveen Swami, Group Consulting Editor with Network 18, Lieutenant General retired B.S. Jaiswal is the former Army Commander of the Northern Command, and Andrew Liang will be joining us, independent strategist based out of Hong Kong. Praveen, I'll start with you first. Like I said in the setup piece, you've had over the last 3 or 4 weeks, first we've had the western sector incursions which have been happening for the last year or so, then in Barahoti in Uttarakhand earlier in September, and now in Tawang. All three sectors, the Chinese over the last few weeks and months have tried attempted incursions. What does that signify to you?
The ongoing negotiated effort to disengage troops in various contested areas in eastern Ladakh. China has no intention of easing the pressure of the Indian Army. Remember that because of reasons of geography, first and foremost, but secondly because of the accelerated border development program it initiated many years ago, China is able to deploy troops much more rapidly across the length of the LAC than India, and that therefore guarding the border requires asymmetric commitments which impose a huge financial and personnel drain on the Indian Army. China, to me, seems to be signaling that while it may be willing to negotiate and make some moves towards ending the face-off in eastern Ladakh, it's not willing to ease up on the pressure. And that, of course, has to do with larger issues like China's ambition to be the preeminent geopolitical power in the region. And profoundly unhappy about India's growing relationship with the US and the Quad and so on. So the story sadly looks like it's set to continue.
All right. Charu Pragya, the question that's also being asked is we've had 12 rounds of these ground level, commander level talks, but somehow nothing seems to be giving. Yes, in Pangong there's been some amount of disengagement, in Gogra there's been some amount of disengagement, but this has been going on for the better part of well over a year now. Are these negotiations failing, or are the Chinese just intent, as Praveen said, on keeping the pressure on?
Zaka, I think the Chinese want to continue in their mischievous ways, and it is a way for them to show both their frustration and their unhappiness with the way India has been progressing, the way India has stood firm about everything. Now adding on to that, there is the Quad issue. So overall, I think China just wants to play mischief maker. The important thing to remember about today's incident is that one, no Indian property was damaged. The Chinese were on Indian territory, but they were pushed back. That's another thing. And the third thing we have to remember is that till there is a clear demarcation of Indo-Chinese borders, these kind of skirmishes might continue. And it has happened in the past, but as usual, our unflinching faith in Indian Army stands firm. They have been pushed back as they were done last time as well.
No, so General Jaiswal, what Praveen mentioned as well, and what Charu is also saying, that could this be in response to what we've seen, the geopolitical moves that India has made over the last few weeks, whether it is Quad, and then of course there was the AUKUS announcement that happened. Is there a feeling in China that they are being cornered by the US, its allies and other friendly countries like India, and therefore this is its way of keeping up pressure on India?
Good evening, Zaka. There are four related issues to this. One, what Mr. Praveen Soni has said is absolutely right. But if you see China, for them, the cynosure is still Taiwan. As far as Indian context is concerned, I'll flip a page and go back to 59 when Zhao had said that you give up Aksai Chin and we will let go Arunachal.
Yeah.
Similarly, Deng had also said in 1981, but now they're claiming both. So if you extrapolate, Arunachal is the bargaining geographical area for Aksai Chin. This should be understood. Now, as far as China's policy is concerned, they've graduated from creeping assertiveness to a coercive strategy. That included even the diplomatic isolation, of the neighboring countries, diplomatically, taking actions against India, and string of pearls, etc., came up. But on ground now, this coercive strategy has manifested in terms of capturing certain, not what we call capturing, but intruding into certain areas. So this is part of the overall philosophy to cause pressure on Arunachal so that the pressure is relieved in Siachen, as also make India agree to this, that sorry, you take Aksai Chin and we will not touch upon, they will not touch upon Arunachal. So that is the reason. And Tawang, that is the whole of Arunachal area, 1146 kilometers. I've served there, so I know every inch of it. I was the corps commander there. So I know every inch. Now, the difficult part in Arunachal is that especially if you go further towards the right of Tawang, the area is called RALP, Rest of Arunachal Pradesh. Now, that is a very difficult terrain for us to mobilize troops, the troop-to-ground density out there, etc. We have made a lot of, steps. We have taken a lot of steps to connect the areas. But I would like to quote again a particular line way back in 2013. I was in Itanagar for a seminar. It was a strategic seminar. And out there, we were talking, I spoke on Arunachal. There were some students in the university, they got up asking questions. He said there are villages on the border which are dependent on the Chinese villages because there is no connectivity with India. So they are going out there. What exactly is India doing about it? So I think after the recommendation had gone, they did. We have now gone in for road and infrastructure development out there. But the fact is that RALP area, it's very thinly occupied. We have now 17 corps also operational for that matter. But still, China can, posture on a border in Arunachal, causing pressure on us.
Okay, I want to go across to Andrew Leung as well, joining us from Hong Kong. Andrew, how much of this is born out of domestic concerns? We know that there's huge pressure, for example, on the Chinese real estate market. The biggest real estate company there is on the brink of bankruptcy. There's been this massive campaign that Xi Jinping has launched against cultural stuff, whether it is K-pop bands, against education companies, against the fintech sector. And in a way, also there is this perception that the US, along with its friends and allies, is trying to corner China. So is the Chinese administration, the Chinese government trying to divert attention by these incursions, whether it is in Arunachal Pradesh, whether it is in Uttarakhand, or whether it is, of course, in Ladakh?
Well, the first part of your interpretation is correct. The second part less so, in the sense that there is no doubt that Beijing is well aware that, led by the United States, there's a 360 degrees pushback against China on all fronts, especially in the South China Sea and the Asia Pacific, including the so-called freedom of navigation naval patrols, including Americans' allies, for example, recently the United Kingdom and even France. And now, more recently, the formation of the so-called AUKUS with Australia, supplying Australia with nuclear-propelled submarines. And of course, in the court you mentioned, Now, however, Taiwan is way apart from these considerations because Taiwan has always been regarded as Chinese runaway province, and the so-called One China policy. And the One China policy has been upheld, at least verbally, by the United States. And even in the recent dialogue
Mr. Liang,
between the
I mean,
United States
the problem
and China,
is that you have Mr. Liang. Once again,
however,
the problem is, Mr. Liang, you have in Taiwan 4 or 5 million people who simply do not want to be associated with China, who don't want to be reunited with China. In fact, the majority opinion in Taiwan is not for reunification with China, and that's why the current dispensation under Tsai Ing-wen has taken a very, very strident stand. And yet the Chinese are sending in bombers. I think a few days ago we had over 50 bombers being sent. The question is, if it came down to a military accession of Taiwan, when a majority of the Taiwanese people don't want to join in, then you're essentially looking at a full-fledged limited war, if you will, because the U.S. is treaty bound to defend Taiwan in case it's militarily attacked by China.
Yeah, well, there is a different dimensions in what you mentioned. True, over 95% or even more of the Taiwanese people do not want unification. However, there's 1 million Taiwanese with their families working and investing and living on mainland China, and they are also voters in Taiwan. And also, the Taiwan economy is in many ways bound up with the economy of China. So quite a large majority of Taiwanese, even though they don't want unification, they don't want to rock the boat. They want to maintain the status quo. And of course, the United States is in the interest of the United States to maintain the status quo, not to allow
everybody wants Taiwan, but also to maintain the status quo except China and except Xi Jinping, because I think they've put it down now in a document that before 2049 they want to reintegrate and reunify Taiwan. I want to thank all our guests because we're getting this big piece of breaking news that's coming in from Afghanistan. At least 100 people are feared dead, dozens wounded. This is in a blast that happened in the Kunduz province. AFP is reporting that the death toll is expected to rise even further. The blast targeted a Shia mosque. This was during Friday prayers in Kunduz. We're given to understand that a large number of Shias, in fact, had also connections with Iran coming in through the border between Iran and Afghanistan. But these are preliminary estimates. These are initial pictures that you're getting of people carrying away dead bodies in cloth, in stretchers, and you can see the crater that's been left behind. It's a very, very deep crater, giving the intensity of the blast. Let me go across to Praveen. He has more details on this and more perspective on this. So is this a Shia versus Sunni thing, or is this Taliban versus potentially Iranians who could have come there? What exactly is the cause of this blast, or the reason behind it?
Well, we've had a long history of attacks on the Shia community in Afghanistan. Many terrible bombings, attacks, massacres conducted both by the Taliban and by the ISIS or so-called Islamic State over the years. Now, in this particular case, we don't know which group or groups may be directly involved, of course. But early indications suggest that it was carried out by ISIS or attackers associated with ISIS. Kunduz is a sort of complicated area which has a large Shia population, but also a history of a strong Taliban presence made up of various ethnic Pashtun pockets. There in the north, you have a history of Islamic State presence. And also a number of jihadists of Pakistani origin who've been relocated or active in that area. So just, irrespective of who specifically carried out, an indication that these hopes that the Taliban would come to power and restore order are an illusion. Remember, the Shia not the only community being targeted right now. We've had attacks against ethnic Hazaras in central Afghanistan. We've had reports of killings of people associated with the former government, fighting between different factions in areas like Jalalabad. So a really ugly situation, and no sign at all that the end of, the rise of the Taliban there is going to be in peace or security.
Praveen, give me a moment to stay on with us. I'm also joined by an Afghan journalist, Hadith. He's joining us on the phone line from Kabul. Hadith, what more details do you have? AFP is reporting at least 100 people feared dead. Is there any preliminary... all right, we'll try and go back to Hadith in just 1 second. He was joining us on the phone line from Kabul. So this blast happened during Friday prayers. Over 100 people are feared dead, and AFP is reporting that death toll is likely to go up further. This is in the Kunduz province, which of course has deep connections with Iran as well. This was a Shia mosque, and we know that these ethnic fault lines in Afghanistan have been ripped open with the return of the Taliban capturing power again in the middle of August, leading to the fall of Kabul and the withdrawal of the US troops. But this ethnic fault line that Praveen was talking about, whether it is Shia Sunni, whether it is the ethnic Hazaras, in this case the ethnic Shias. Shailendra Wangu is joining us. He tracks the Ministry of External Affairs for Network 18. Shailendra, कोई इनिशियल डिटेल्स है कि ये जो हादसा जो हुई है इसके पीछे किसकी हाथ थी? कोई ग्रुप ने अभी तक रिस्पांसिबिलिटी लिया है? और जो प्रवीण स्वामी भी कह रहे थे, ये जो एथनिक फॉल्ट लाइन है सुन्नी वर्सेस शिया, यही तो सबकी डर थी कि ऐसा एथनिक फॉल्ट लाइन को रिप ओपन हो जाएगा तालिबान के बाद. ये क्या कुछ एथनिक कॉन्फ्लिक्ट था शिया और सुन्नी के बीच में?
देखिए जाका, ये फॉल्ट लाइन पहले से ही वहां पर रही हैं, और आपको जो हमारे पास जो डिटेल्स अब तक सामने आई हैं उसके मुताबिक 100 से ज्यादा लोगों की इसमें मौत बताई जा रही है, क्योंकि फ्राइडे प्रेयर्स जब वहां चल रही थी उस वक्त ये सुसाइड बॉम्बिंग वहां पर हुई है. और इसी बीच आपको ये भी याद दिला दें कि जब अमेरिकन फोर्सेस वहां से विड्रॉ कर रही थी उस वक्त भी इस्लामिक स्टेट ने एक सुसाइड बॉम्बिंग को अंजाम दिया था, जिसमें कई लोगों की जानें गई थी. 100 से ज्यादा लोगों की उस वक्त भी जान गई थी, और माना जा रहा है कि इस हमले के पीछे भी इस्लामिक स्टेट का हाथ हो सकता है. हालांकि अब तक जिम्मेदारी नहीं ली गई है, लेकिन ये जरूर है कि इस्लामिक स्टेट की हिस्ट्री रही है कि वो शियाइट जो माइनॉरिटीज है उनको टारगेट करते आ रहे हैं, पहले भी करते आ रहे हैं, और माना जा रहा है कि इस हमले के पीछे भी शियाई जो इस्लामिक स्टेट है उसका हाथ हो सकता है. हालांकि अभी तक तालिबान गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से एक ऑफिशियल स्टेटमेंट इस पर नहीं आया है, और माना जा रहा है कि इस पूरे मामले को लेकर तालिबान की जो वहां सरकार बनी है वो उस पर फिलहाल कदम उठा रही है. लेकिन ये एक बड़ी कैजुअलिटी है और याद दिलाती है अगस्त के अंत की, जब एक बड़ा ऐसा ही एक आतंकी हमला, एक सुसाइड बॉम्बिंग एयरपोर्ट के पास हुई थी जिसमें कई सिविलियंस की जान गई थी.
शैलेंद्र, कुछ ये जो आप कह रहे हैं कि आइसिस खुरासान ने पहले भी ऐसे आतंकी घटनाएं हुई थी, उसके लिए रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी भी लिया था उन्होंने. Is there anything that we know in terms of response from Iran? Because Shia community जो है, largely they come from Iran. This Kunduz province also has deep connections with Iran. इस घटने को, how will this be viewed in the wider region?
देखिए, नॉट ओनली ईरान बट हमने ये देखा है कि जो रेजोल्यूशन पास हुआ था यूएनएससी में भारत की अध्यक्षता में, उस रेजोल्यूशन में ये साफ था, 2593 जो रेजोल्यूशन है, कि जो माइनॉरिटीज हैं उनके राइट्स को ऑनर किया जाना चाहिए, महिलाओं के राइट्स को ऑनर किया जाना चाहिए, और सभी देश जिसमें भारत भी शामिल है और ईरान भी हम मानते हैं शामिल रहा है उस यूएनएससी की बैठक में. उस वक्त ये साफ किया गया था कि इन पॉइंट्स को, इन ऑब्जेक्टिव्स को पूरा करना होगा तालिबान को, तभी रिकॉग्निशन की बात इसमें होगी. लेकिन जाहिर तौर पर इस पे अभी तक ईरान का सीधा स्टेटमेंट नहीं आया, क्योंकि अभी डेवलपिंग स्टोरी है. लेकिन माना जा रहा है कि जो शियाइट कम्युनिटी है उससे बहुत नाराज होगी और ईरान की तरफ से स्टेटमेंट एक्सपेक्ट किया जा सकता है. लेकिन जाहिर तौर पर ये फिलहाल सवाल खड़े होते हैं तालिबान गवर्नमेंट पे, जो लगातार ये श्योर कर रही थी कि अब वहां पर सब कुछ ठीक हो चुका है.
All right, Shailendra, thank you for joining us. So there have been multiple attacks just in the last couple of months or so. We had the big attack that happened at the airport, the Kabul airport. Then there was a big attack that happened in one of the largest mosques in Kabul. Again, I'm given to understand that it was the minority community, the ethnic minorities who were targeted in that. And now in Kunduz, this latest attack that's happened in Kunduz, where a Shia mosque was targeted. So clearly there is not just ethnic fault lines at play, but also this control of turf, as it were, between ISIS Khorasan and the Taliban that is also going on. And as Praveen said, many of them also happen to be former Pakistani recruits, as it were, former Pakistan, the people who were recruited by the ISI, former Pakistani linked fighters, as they were. Praveen, if I can come back to you, just in terms of how this story might play out in the wider region, whether it is Iran, I was asking Shailendra about that, or how even global capitals will react to this, because this was exactly the fear that the Taliban will not be able to not just govern, but this whole ethnic fault line will be ripped open with the arrival of the Taliban and the Taliban taking over the reins of power.
Absolutely right, Zaka. I think the important thing to watch here, of course, is going to be Iran, which has had deep connections with its co-religionists, Shia co-religionists in Afghanistan, has traditionally had relations with their political groups, with their various militia, and sees itself as a defender of the faith. It's no secret that Iran cultivated a relationship with the Taliban, hoping to get the Americans out, but has been suffering from a severe case of what you might call buyer's regret in recent months. Iran really feels that the Taliban have not lived up to their problems, are behaving in ways that threaten the Iranian Republic, and it will be worth watching how it responds to this massacre, whether it, for example, chooses to respond by arming and equipping various Shia militias in the region. The other player that's going to be really important is Russia. Remember, Kunduz is in the north of Afghanistan, and Afghan's north touches on the Central Asian states of Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. There are jihadist groups in the region, which, like the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, which have operated against both these countries. There are Tajik jihadists, in fact, who tore the country into a long-running civil war. And both the Taliban have relationships with these groups, and the Islamic State is also a more recent threat. So both these countries will be watching this and pushing Moscow, which is the security guarantor for them, to perhaps take a more cautious position on the on the Taliban than it initially did. So definitely this is going to have some pretty big geopolitical consequences and will underline the concerns India has been pointing to for a very long time.
All right, Praveen, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining us. Praveen Swami there reporting for us about this latest incident that's happened in Kunduz province. Over 100 feared, and AFP reporting that number is likely to go up as well. Take a quick break. When we come back, the Maharaja is back where it belongs. The Tatas have successfully bid for Air India, a successful bid at a little over 18,000 crores. We'll get you all the details and reactions right on the other side of this quick break.